Hi, Mr. Murphy. Ultimately, since you're proactively involved in the community, you participate as an advisor for many social empowerment clubs at school. I would like to interview you today about social mobility in Charlotte, as well as in the Myers Park community. Do you
Okay.
offer consent for this interview?
Absolutely.
Good. So, I would just like to first off start by asking, how do you personally define social mobility?
Uh, Personally, define social mobility as a way to not really be, not say this in a funny way, but be mobile financially, be able to enjoy the freedoms of life in a way that you're not necessarily dependent on, you know, living paycheck to paycheck and so on and so forth.
So, you use financial means to define social mobility.
Yes.
Okay, so how would you describe the situation of social mobility in the Myers Park community?
I would say at Myers Park, we have an interesting dynamic of social mobility. We have those that are very well off, those that they don't have to necessarily worry about where their next meal is coming from. They can, have no hesitation, have no qualms about asking their parents, can they get a car or anything of that magnitude, versus we have some students where their social mobility is simply, are we going to have a place to sleep at night? How can I remain in this social group and seem like I have money when really and in a true sense I really don't? How can I keep myself from standing out, being an outcast, being an outlier, because I don't truly fit the general population, the general makeup of Myers Park.
Sure. So, which classes do you teach, Mr. Murphy?
Currently, I teach two IB classes and I also teach a standard class. And in the previous semester, I taught a foundations class along with a honors and a standard class.
Okay. Did you find that there was a difference in the demographics between the IB classes you taught and the honors slash standard classes which you taught?
In my honors slash standard, starting with standard, standard is predominantly African American. You have, on the other half of that, you have Hispanics, and every once in a while you have a Caucasian inside of those classes. Versus when you start getting to the honors, honors is more leveled off. You have, I don't necessarily want to say half and half, but it's probably about 70-50, or I'm about to mess my math up, about 70-30, 60-40 of Caucasian to African American ratio. And I mean, also, not to leave any numbers out, you have the Hispanics and you have those others as well. And then when you get to IB, just speaking on this semester, it's sad to say, you have majority of Caucasian, and out of the 63 kids I teach in my IB class, I have 3 kids that are people of color.
Really?
Yes.
So, why do you think that so many minorities at Myers Park High School aren't enrolled in IB classes?
I think a big issue stems from they don't necessarily have, because I'm gonna start it from the parental figure. They don't have the parental figure to necessarily drive them to take education serious.
Right.
They may have a parent that says, we need you to, do better for yourselves. Don't be like I was when I grew up.
Right.
Get an education, so on and so forth. But the parent might not necessarily be in that house on a consistent basis to be able to drive that. And there's various reasons. Parent could be out working the night shifts, trying to provide money for the family to stay afloat and to stay, mobile. And it could be a number of things, but that's one of the biggest reasons. And I believe it's our jobs as teachers, regardless of your gender, regardless of your race, that any person, doesn't matter their race, we should be driving them for excellence in education. And in my case, being that I'm an African American male, I took it upon myself to try to really drive home this this core value of how important education is. You really become enriched in knowledge, and when you get knowledge, you can push yourself to having a sense of power, and power can help you bring resources. And it's like almost a 360 full circle of just navigating yourself
Right.
on the ladder of success. But you need those things. But first off, you need the confidence in yourself, and the confidence doesn't come if you have a kid that would rather run the streets, hang out with friends, do things. Not saying that hanging out with friends is bad, but sometimes when we keep ourselves aligned with peer groups that aren't doing anything good for themselves to help increase their success levels,
Right.
then we have an issue.
Okay, so it seems as if you're very invested in the mechanisms of social mobility and how they manifest in the life of youth. Do you have any prior experiences or issues with social mobility?
Personally, I grew up in a single parent household. My mom, she was married to my dad, and they were together for about, till I was about 9, 10, 11. I remember vividly when they got divorced, my dad drove up, threw money at the window, drove off, and that was the last we seen of him. So from that point forward, I was raised in a single parent household. I remember not necessarily seeing my mom come to all my sporting events, making it to my school events, so on and so forth. And I understood, like, being mature at that age, I wasn't to take it to heart. I understood that she was doing any and everything she had to do to keep food on the table, to keep clothes on our backs, and to keep myself, my sister, or my sisters and my brother, keep us afloat and keep us from, drifting off into the wrong crowds, doing things that we shouldn't be doing.
Right. Did you attend Myers Park High School when you were an adolescent, or did you attend a different school in North Carolina?
The school I attended in North Carolina was Jack Britt High School, and the school, interesting enough, has these same demographics as Myers Park.
Really? Was Jack Britt High School any different than Myers Park when it came to social mobility situation, or?
Nah, I really want to say it was about the same. It really was a very affluent neighborhoods around, and they fed into the school, but there was also neighborhoods that were not affluent, neighborhoods that, were equivalent to Section 8 and, project areas, ghettos, whatever you want to call them. There was a lot of those neighborhoods that were also feeding into the school as well.
Okay, so you are connecting the housing market that surrounds Jack Britt High School as well as Myers Park High School to the social mobility situation at those schools. Do you think that there is indeed an explicit connection between the housing market that surrounds Myers Park area and the demographics of the school?
I think that in a sense there is a connection, but I don't think that's a legitimate reason to place blame on why our school is the way it is. As we were talking about earlier, there are stereotypes, but it's real, but it's a stereotype.
Right.
But there's more kids that are not people of color in your higher level classes, your IB classes, your AB classes. And some people could attest that to, because we're in this type of neighborhoods, that's the reason why. But I look at that almost as an excuse, because we have a large people of color population here on campus. And a lot of those kids I teach in the standards classes, and I look at them on a consistent basis. I know their intellectual level, and I know they could thrive and do well inside of those classes, because I teach my class. It doesn't matter if it's standard, honor, IB.
Sure.
I teach all my classes the same. The only difference is at the pace. It's the same amount of work, and a lot of kids complain where they go from honors to AP, or they go from standard to honors, or from standard to AP, and the workload is crazy. I give the same workload, all the above. I can't speak for every single teacher, but I can just speak for myself. So although I will say that Myers Park is
Yeah.
demographically the way it is because of our neighborhoods surrounding it, I wouldn't use that as an excuse to why we can't have a better demographics across the classroom.
Okay, so I'm deeply fascinated by how you use the motivation of students in lower level academics as a reason to explain their low social mobility. But before going to that, I'd like to discuss how I previously interviewed someone else with that same exact question about the housing market, and they actually had a quite different response.
Okay.
I don't want to be politically incorrect here, but they are there are another teacher at the school and they're white. And they actually said that the housing market indeed does attribute to low social mobility rates at Myers Park. Obviously, you have a quite different opinion. Therefore, do you believe that the environment in which one grows up as a child fuels them to believe these sorts of different things? Or
I do believe that. I wholeheartedly believe that because I believe that you are a product of your environment. To
okay,
it, but it is to is always to an extent. There's always a catch. You can be a student in a low housing area. You have negativity all around you in that area.
okay,
But if you keep yourself out of that area and go there only when you need to go there, you have the right people in your inner circle, in your friend group, and the list could go on and on. There's so many positive things that you could do to alleviate the fact that yeah, this is where I live, yeah, this is how my life situation is.
right,
It isn't good. I see that almost as an excuse.
okay,
Now, I'm not downplaying the severity of anybody's
sure,
situation. Everybody has struggles that they go with, no matter how rich, how poor, so on and so forth. Some way higher than others. But in a sense, I just don't think that it's good for us as teachers to have the mindset that, because a kid came from this area,
right,
this is what I should expect of them. I believe that, the drive should be, if we come in contact with you, if you're in our classroom,
okay,
you can be successful. Now, whether the student is successful or not, a lot of it, really, majority of it plays on the student, but also a good portion plays on the teacher. And if the teacher is not feeding them mentally, spiritually, emotionally, what they need to be fed, then they're not going to succeed.
right. And once again, you mentioned the motivation of the students as a leading reason as to why their social mobility is so low. They're not motivated to get out of their situation, and I'd like to inquire more about that. How do you suggest that teachers can play a role in increasing the motivation of their students to go from lower level academics to higher level academics at Myers Park High School?
Well, I think for one, teachers have to be invested. You have to be invested. And I'm not going to speak for all teachers, I'm just going to speak for myself. I
Right.
knew that when I got hired at Myers Park, I wasn't aiming to necessarily be teacher of the year.
Okay.
I wasn't aiming to have, you know, all these accolades, so on and so forth. My main objective was one, the kid. And I tell my kids all the time, I care more about your personal life, more about everything that you go through on a day-to-day basis
Right.
versus, what you see on the board. Now, granted, I do need you to know this math material. I do need you to pass the class.
Sure.
And, all those logistics. But the most important part should be the kid and building that relationship. And I feel as if a student understands that you sincerely care about them,
Okay.
then you have opened that door to start pushing them and start driving them in ways that, a normal person can't do that. Everything in life almost revolves around relationships. There's a
Okay.
great saying that goes, it's not always about what you know, sometimes it's who you know. Well, you can't necessarily know people until you reach out and try to build connections and,
Right.
sincerely build relationships with kids.
Right. Now, it's obvious that you're galvanized to truly get to know your students better and try to not necessarily interfere in their lives, but just try to help them out whenever you feel that
Right.
they are undergoing personal struggles. That seems rather obvious. But many teachers in lower level academics, unlike those in higher level academics, actually don't like to interfere in the lives of their students. I'm not necessarily sure if that's true, but it's a live stereotype for sure. And it's especially common in the CMS County that that's the situation. So,
Right.
how do you suggest we fix that?
Well, for one, I live by the mantra that if I don't have love for the kids, and I don't mean just one kid, two kids, I mean as an overall, if I don't have love for the kids, then I don't need to be in the profession.
Okay.
Truth of the matter is, and it's a sad truth, there's a lot of teachers in teaching,
Right.
like around across the board, across the globe, that do not love the kids. It's sad to say, some of them are doing it for a paycheck. Some of them are doing it just to have something to do outside of sitting at home, but they're doing it for all the wrong reasons. The reason should be, at the end of the day, we're doing it for the kids. The moment that that is lost, then the whole central being of at school is no longer valid. It's void. If we have a love for the kids, that is going to teach us to, for one, try to maneuver, try to manipulate how they learn, and also try to take some of their knowledge and incorporate it to our own. That way we can figure out how to teach them better. That would help us figure out, okay, this is what they're going on. This is what they have going on in their personal life. This is what is keeping them from actually paying attention and learning in class today. This is somebody, they just lost their best friend to gunfire, so on and so like. There's so many things that goes on in a kid, and I think adults forget. We were kids too. We were once in the student's shoes, and we weren't, a lot of us. I mean, I'm just speaking for myself. I wasn't necessarily the greatest student. I mean, I wasn't the worst, but I could have been better. Okay. And I kind of took what I learned as a student and incorporated into teaching now. When I know when I stand in front of this class, I'm seeing myself in these kids, and I know what's going to grab their attention and what's not. And that's solely off love for the kids. But if I don't have that, and if we as teachers don't have that, there's no way that we can, lessen that disparity that we have. Another big issue is that this once again comes back to the love.
Right.
There's no love for the kids, and then we get paid poorly as teachers. So you have a negative feeling towards the kids. You have a negative feeling towards the amount of income that you're bringing in. So that's a lot of negative energy that's being brought forward. And, you can't stop a fire with fire. So if you are just piling up negative energy on yourself and becoming more negative, then you're going to spread negativity, not only to the kids, but to anybody you come in contact with.
Okay, so you referenced the teacher pay of this case to justify why teachers do not like to communicate with their students beyond teaching coursework. So do you think improving teacher pay for teachers not only at Myersburg High School, but also in CMS County as a whole would increase their motivation to interfere in the personal lives of their students?
I think it would increase teachers to do more. I think it would definitely increase teacher retention.
Sure.
Because a lot of North Carolina teachers are leaving and going to other states. Texas, California, New York, these places with higher pay. Now, some of these places have higher cost of living. I know for Texas in general, their cost of living is the same as North Carolina. Their teachers start off at $50,000 a year versus a North Carolina teacher who, let's just talk about Charlotte in general. You're starting off at $35,000 a year with a $5,000 bonus. So you're looking at maybe $4,000, $40,000 a year. But when you take out taxes and et cetera, you are almost living on a type of salary that would be suitable for a college student, like a well put together college student. Because they don't factor in you have bills, they don't factor in you have real life. Some of us are teaching and we supporting families, and not just families of 1, 2, 3, like a wife and 2 kids. It's like you
Right.
could be supporting that, but then you could be supporting even more than that. Your grandma, like, you know, the list could go on.
Right. I mean, the situation most certainly is dire in North Carolina as a whole, not just in CMS and Myers Park when
Right.
it comes to teacher pay. And I'd actually like to ask, beyond looking at how teachers can motivate students, do you truly think that it is possible to increase the social mobility of our school?
I think it is.
Right.
I think it's going to take a lot of work. One of the good things we have going on at school is that we have this initiative where we are pushing students to see there are people of color that are in
Right.
IB level courses, AP level courses, honor level courses, and we're trying to get them to see, you know, you can be successful. You know, the slogan is AP, IB looks like me.
Yes.
And that, I think that's very valuable. That's very important because, you know, sometimes people need to hear that sometimes. They need to hear
Exactly.
how great they can be, not how terrible they've been, so on and so forth. I think that is one of the greatest slogans that possibly been created on this campus thus far. That needs to happen. I think another thing that could really transcend the, you know, the mobility on campus
Sure.
would that's a good question. I had a thought and then I just lost it. I know definitely the integration of classes though.
Hmm.
I think that could be better. Oh, and personally, just on just me speaking from the heart, I think that if we had, and this is no knock to any
Okay.
teacher on campus,
Okay.
I'm just saying if there were more teachers on campus that were people of color, I think that would make an impact as well. And the reason being, I've always been told, like from students, sometimes they learn better when they saw somebody that looked like them in front of the class. And
Wow.
it's weird that, you know, to hear that, but at the same time, it makes sense. You're not necessarily going to, you know, take advice or take heed of somebody
Sure.
who necessarily doesn't have some type of experiences like you do. You're not going to try to learn how to drive a stick
Right.
from somebody who's never driven a stick before. All they know how to do is drive an automatic. So I would put it in that sense. And like I said, there's no disrespect towards any teacher or anything of that magnitude. You're just asking me about the mobility and how can we increase it. And I really think that's a brilliant way to increase mobility all throughout schools.
No, I mean, I absolutely approve of your answer. I think that's most certainly fascinating to hear what you have to say, but I'd just like to ask if I'm not infringing personally, are you an advocate for African American movements by any chance, or?
If they're done without the intention of destroying things, we've had, and if they're done with the intention of widespread movement in a positive manner, such as like the works of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Sorry, my words mixed up. He did great things. He spreaded a positive movement. That's something positive versus something negative, where we had Rodney King riots, the riots that were taking place just 2 years ago, when we had the shooting that took place in Charlotte and we lost an African American from a cop. Like,
Right.
you know, we need to push the movement of positivity all across all races.
Okay.
And that's rare these days.
Okay, and the reason as to why I asked that is because you seem particularly interested in increasing minority enrollment in higher level courses. Do you think that would help build social mobility as a whole across the Myers Park campus?
Well, I think that would, and one thing not to take for granted is that minority is not just, you know, African American, you know, that's also Hispanic,
Sure.
that's also, you know, all types of, you know, Saudi Arabian, we could go on and on and on. And me personally, I don't like using that word minority, is because, when you hear like minority, or if we talk about stakes, like they have a
Sure.
minority stake, they have a majority stake. People typically forget or ignore a minority stakeholder because they're thinking about the main person, the majority, the person who's taking dominant control. And I feel like that's a mindset that's kind of been programmed to have us look at ourselves in a lower sense. Like, I don't
Right.
when I hear African American as a minority, I don't really like that term. Like, I don't think
Okay.
low of myself, and I mean, I take it to a personal offense. I don't think of myself as a minority. I don't think of myself as somebody that's below somebody else just because my race or
Right.
my culture is, we don't have a giant grasp of the population. It doesn't mean that we're below or beneath anybody. And I just
Right.
think that word has a negative connotation behind it.
Sure. So we've mentioned motivating teachers to interfere more in the lives of their students, trying to increase minority enrollments in higher level academics, so many solutions to fix the social mobility situation at Myers Park. If you had to put a time frame on how long that would take, what would your time frame be?
I couldn't even give you a definite answer, to be honest with you.
Sure, an estimate.
I don't think it would take long, but it would take time. If I had to say, give you a true estimate, I would say 5 to 10 years.
Okay.
Because all great change, all great things in life, they take time.
Right.
Anything that's a quick fix is not going to last long. And I
Right.
always look at the mindset of, you would rather have something that's made in the crock pot versus just thrown in the microwave. The crock pot, it takes a long time, but everything comes together slowly but gradually. There's no mistake in the process.
Sure.
You don't have to second guess it. You don't have to come back and ponder if we're just talking about food. You don't have to ponder if the food was cooked all the way through. Like,
Sure.
there's no question. Versus the microwave effort, you could do a lightning quick strike and get it done right then and there, but your results are not always guaranteed to
Sure.
uphold.
Right. I mean, Rome wasn't built in a day, right?
Correct.
So, I'd like to transition from talking about social mobility at Myers Park High School to talking about it in our city now. I'm going to mention a statistic to you which might seem rather shocking.
Okay.
So, just a few weeks back, I read a Charlotte Observer article which stated that Charlotte, out of all of the cities in the United States, has the lowest social mobility rate. What is your reaction to that?
I cannot say that I'm necessarily surprised about that.
Really?
The only city I thought that maybe would have been higher. I don't know. I'm not surprised about that though.
Sure. Why are you saying that you're not surprised?
Well, for one, I'm just the type of person, I don't ever take anything for granted, and I try not to be surprised. I just try to understand that anything could happen at any given moment.
Right.
But also, if you look at the demographics of Charlotte, I think last time I checked, and I mean, granted, it's a long time ago I looked at this, the census for Charlotte, we have a high number of the millions that live in Charlotte that are not people of color.
Right.
And with that being said, another thing that's taking place is regentrification, and it's hit Charlotte heavy. Like South Boulevard, South Side, there's all these places around Charlotte
Right.
where it used to be, they had housing for low income families, so on and so forth. And then as the years progressed, there was a general understanding in the local government that they wanted to clean the city up for the sake of tourism and trying to make a better community, a better place. And in turn, you wipe away these opportunities for these families who are working these jobs that are really not paying them anything, and you're basically just trying to get rid of them.
Right. So, I would have to ask, do you think the fact that Charlotte is a huge financial boom in the US has something to do with its low social mobility rate?
Can you repeat that question? I'm sorry.
Okay, so as you might know, Charlotte has a huge financial industry. We have Bank of America, Wells Fargo, a lot of different companies here, especially in Research Triangle Park. So I would have to ask, do you think that somehow attributes to the low social mobility rate in our city?
I think it relates to that for the simple fact that those jobs that are being created might not necessarily be created for people who don't have education. And
Right.
if you lack that education, you lack that training, you fall victim to not being able to capture one of those jobs. And a lot of families that are in low income housing and they don't have the means to stay afloat financially is because they lack the education to attain those type of jobs. So they have to settle for those jobs that there's little to no education required, and it keeps them trapped.
Right, and once again, we're coming back to the education scheme here.
Right.
So, do you think that the pattern of social mobility at Myers Park is a pattern for schools across Charlotte, by any chance?
Pattern in what sense?
In the sense that many schools across Charlotte might have low social mobility rates based off how the demographics of the school being mainly Caucasian but also minorities separate both races based off the classes they take.
Well, it depends because if we're talking about Charlotte school in general, there's like over 100 schools in the district.
Sure.
Not all the schools are majority Caucasian. In fact, there's a good amount of schools that are predominantly people of color schools.
Right.
Now, it would be interesting if we were to go into those schools and see how their test results are compared to those schools that are not dominantly African American, Hispanic, all of those different types of races. But I think that there is a trend. There is somewhat a trend in that sense.
Okay.
I don't think it's solely to blame though.
Okay. So, which other factors do you think then attribute to low social mobility in Charlotte?
Well, this is going back to the education, but this is talking about, I think when you have, once again, the families that they don't have the education that they need
Right.
to obtain those jobs, then you get in jobs where the overseer, the CEO, whoever's the boss, they understand that they could pay these people little to nothing just because they know they need a job. So a lot of these low income housing people, they are working 3, 4 jobs just to keep food on the table. And some of them